Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Vivekananda Samiti, I welcome you all here. This club under Student Gymkhana of IIT Kanpur since past 4 decades has been relentless in inspiring, motivating the youth by spreading the message of Vivekananda and Vedanta. Continuing with the same, today the Samiti has organized a talk by Swami Atma Shantanandaji and tomorrow a workshop by Rashmi Vanshal dealing with entrepreneurship and social responsibility. Swami Atma Shraddhanandaji has been the guide for Vivekananda Study Circle at IIT Madras for the past 9 years. Besides conducting Sunday classes for study circle every week, he also speaks at the Ramakrishna Mutt at Mylapore in Chennai on Upanishads and allied subjects. With his insightful knowledge and remarkable oratorial vigor, he has addressed various groups consisting of students, teachers, and others in different places. Notably, he is the editor of Vedanta Kesari, a cultural and spiritual monthly of Ramakrishna Order for the past 100 years. Today, he will be speaking on a very relevant and compelling topic entitled Mind and its Control, that would address significant concerns as to how to control the mind, what is the psychology behind controlling the mind, and the means or the ways to control or harness mind's power, and so on. So we kindly request Reverend Swamiji to please come on dais, offer Pushpanjali and deliver his message.
Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityur Ma Amritam Gamaya. Dear Shubhodip, dear and honorable members of the faculty, and dear my student friends, it feels quite good to be here. I feel this, I get the same feel as when I go to IIT Chennai, and as I was introduced that I have been going there for past 9 years. We have a similar organization there called Vivekananda Study Circle, VSC in short, and we started our activities around 17 years back. We have been conducting Sunday classes, and this has been the tradition of the study circle there, that one of the monks from the Ramakrishna Mutt Chennai is in constant touch with the study circle, and every Sunday we have a session on Sunday mornings for almost 2 hours, consisting of Vedic chanting, guided meditation, then subject for the discussion, reading from letters of Swami Vivekananda, question answers, and so on. So it's nice. I am in another similar circumstance or similar ambience where we are discussing very noble and very elevating aspect of human life. My thanks to all the organizers for inviting me. The subject of mind control is of universal importance, irrespective of a person's background or profession or station in life. Mind control concerns all of us. Whether a person is a student or a teacher, or whether he is a musician or a painter or an artist or a dancer, or even if he is cooking or driving or doing gardening, everywhere we need concentration. Concentration is the secret of efficiency, of skill, and of success. We all know that without proper concentration, there can be no learning. So much so, Swami Vivekananda, in one of his writings, he said that if I was to ask to have my education over and again, I will not study the facts. Rather, I will study how to concentrate. And if I have learned the power of concentration, if I have learned the mastery over the mind, I can learn any fact at will. Concentration, therefore, is the key to learning, not only to learning, but to mastering any subject in life. Concentration, again, we find is a very important factor for learning something new. In Swamiji's words, those who have tried to handle the animals' training, they find that it is very difficult to train them, because they forget. You teach them something and very soon they forget. So you need a trainer who has to keep on repeating, keep on doing things again and again. Then a little is learned. But man is superior because of his power of concentration. Because we can concentrate, we have learned how to have some control over our mind. And that's the reason why man grows. If a person has become good businessman, it is because he has learned to control his mind in some way on those aspects, what we call as the business aspects of life. He knows how to handle money and study the market forces and arrive at some conclusions. Or if a person has become good scientist, again, the control of mind is very much there with him to some measure. Otherwise, he would have dropped out. He would not have continued his studies. So, success or excellence, whichever field we might take, involves that we should have a certain amount of concentration. Now, certain amount of concentration, well, we all are acquainted with. And I am sure that all of you have certain amount of concentration to have come to this place of learning. But then we are speaking of mind in a much bigger, in a more comprehensive way, that we need to have a certain calmness, because invariably you find that lack of control of mind is a reason behind many evils in life. What you call as crime, or what you call a person becoming wicked, or taking to such means or such ways of living which are punishable, which are socially unacceptable, which are violent, we find behind that the person who indulges in that has got somewhere problem with his mind, with his mental training, his lack of control over himself, his giving to what we call as giving way to anger or greed or lust or jealousy. One of these or more or all passions seem to take him away, and result is that we have before us a person whom we call as criminal. So, the control of mind is required from that angle. Another thing is, we need to have joyfulness in life. We want to be happy. And very often we have many things in life and yet we are not happy. You come across people who are extremely affluent, and this phenomena is generally seen in affluent countries, where a lot of affluence has accumulated, but alongside has accumulated other problems such as depression, suicide, or psychological disorders. So, if the affluence was the only solution to life, we are not saying that there should be no affluence, but if the solution to life was only affluence, these attendant evils should not have come, which means there is something more than external progress. We need to have an inner progress, what we call as control of mind or understanding our mind, developing a sense of joy, meaningfulness, satisfaction. We should feel a sense of being fulfilled, and this we find very much a thing related to control of mind, or let us call it disciplining the mind, or use some any other phrase which you find convenient. But the essential fact is that we need to have a certain amount of control of mind. But then everyone knows that control of mind is not easy. And we also know that it is very hard task, it is challenging. Suppose we ask individually, even the people who are very intellectual, we find they have this problem that the mind is restless. Just because a person has got extraordinary intellect does not make him also a person of complete control over the mind. There are certain areas of his life, of his mind, of his personality, where he finds something is still lacking. We find in the Gita a similar situation where Arjuna asked Krishna that I would like to control the mind, but the mind is very difficult. It is as difficult to control as you try to control the air. Vayo riva sudushkaram. To which Sri Krishna says, yes, it is very difficult, but it is possible to control the mind if you have the twin method of abhyasa and vairagya, repetition and detachment. This, he says, is the way to control the mind. So, we all know that control of mind is possible, because Sri Krishna says, if we take that as authority, that there is a possibility of controlling the mind, and the method is also there, which is we should have a certain amount of practice and a certain amount of detachment. But before going further into that, let us consider one thing. Before we think of controlling the mind and making some attempt at making the mind calm, we must have, first of all, the will to control the mind. Do we have the strong desire to control the mind? Do we have a will which says, no, I must have a mastery over myself or our mind? And we should also know that what is the nature of mind? What is mind? And what are the techniques to control the mind, to make the mind calm, to make the mind our friend? Because the Gita says, the mind which is calm, which is controlled, is our friend. And the mind which is not controlled, which is not calm, is our greatest enemy. The enemy is not out there. The enemy is right within us. Similarly, the friend is also within us. Both enemy and friend depend on the how much of control of mind we have. So, first thing we must know is that we should have a strong will to control the mind. Second, we must know the nature of mind. Third, we must have techniques or methods which are required to make the mind our friend. The first step that comes as the first obstacle that comes in controlling the mind is our desire to enjoy things, what we call as a pleasure drive. By saying that we should overcome the pleasure drive, one does not mean that one should give away one's joys in life, or one should become morose and overtly serious. Rather, what is meant is that you learn to overcome both what ordinarily is called pain and pleasure. It is not saying that we should not have joy in life. We should have plenty of joy. In fact, the joy is one thing which a everyone ultimately finds is the goal of life. In itself, people don't want things. We want things because they give us joy or happiness. But we are speaking of a specific tendency of the mind, which says I must have a comfortable life and pleasures of life, irrespective of whether they are good for me or not. In the Kathopanishad, we have a verse which says that there are two things in life, two principles, two forces which knock at our door repeatedly. And the Upanishads calls those forces as Shreyas and Preyas. Preyas means that which is pleasant, and Shreyas is that which is beneficial. Both are not same. That which is pleasant may not be beneficial, and that which is beneficial may or may not be pleasant, and we all know this. A little child, you see, was not willing to go to school, but he was asked to go to school. As he was going, one day his uncle asked him, "My child, do you go to school?" He said, "No, I am sent." So he is not happy about it, but then it is going to be beneficial for him. It is not pleasant, but it is beneficial. Maybe when he grows up, when his initial tantrums against going to schools die down, he starts loving studies, he further falls in love with some subject, and he wants to do a PhD in that. But right then, when he is very small, it is something not very pleasant, but the parents know it, and despite his unwillingness, he goes there and learns. So we have these two principles, not only in studies, in different areas of our life, they keep knocking at us. Shreyas or Preyas. Do we want things to be pleasant, or do we want things to be beneficial? So let us always keep this idea of beneficial as the supreme principle in life if we want to control the mind. If we run after what is pleasant, it is very likely that we will give way to what we call as temptations. If you analyze the word temptation, it always seems to say that there is something out there, an object called temptation, but we forget the role that we play or respond, which is called temptation. Temptation is not an object outside. The same object does not tempt somebody else. For example, a piece of gold has no meaning for a child, but to a person who knows its value or who thinks it has some value, to him it has got a lot of meaning and he feels tempted to it. So it is something within him. The same gets replicated and applied elsewhere also. So the pleasure drive is the first thing that we'll have to check. We'll have to apply the principle of Shreyas. It is beneficial to control the mind. It may not be pleasant, especially when you're dealing with something which is so invisible. Now the mind is not visible to us. We all presume that so and so is thinking like that. His mind is thinking like that. Many times we are right, many times we are not right. Because we have some idea and we just fill up the gaps and we call it I have understood things. But what exactly he is thinking, we may not know it. So the mind is not visible. Sometimes in the Western context, those who have studied the Western psychology, they say mind is a product of the brain, or brain is mind. But in the Indian tradition, we don't believe in it. We have some other view. We say brain is the seat of mind. But brain in itself is not mind. Mind is something subtle. Now brain is also subtle compared to the rest of the body, but it is still matter. They say mind is also matter. Now we'll have to take you into a bit of the philosophy behind it, the yoga psychology, which is the philosophy behind control of mind. It says that the mind and body both are subtle matters. You can say body is gross matter and mind is subtle matter, but both are matter. But there is something else, the third thing, which is not matter, which handles both of them. The pure consciousness within us, what they call as the divinity present in all, what they call in Sanskritam as Atman, or in Hindi, Atma. That third principle in us, the pure consciousness within us, has these two things called body and mind. Body is called Bahya Karana. It has got external instrument. For example, if I have to lift this object, I have got a Karana called this body, this hand, this fingers, which lifts it. Suppose I want to lift an idea. It is not gross, it is something subtle. So, for that I need one instrument, and that instrument is called as Antakarana. You must have heard this word Antakarana, it is not new to us. His Antakarana is like that, his Antakarana is Shuddha, or his Antakarana is Ashuddha. We use these expressions. So, mind is supposed to have its place in a third entity other than the pure self and the body, called the subtle body. Now, if you ask me what is the proof about it, I am not going into it, but this is what is believed in our scripture, and this is what the people who have done the control of mind in our country for centuries and everywhere else where people have done it, this is supposed to be the reality, that there is a third thing called the subtle body where the mind exists, but it operates through the brain. But suppose brain is not working, they say mind is still there. Suppose a brain dead person, is there no mind in him? There is mind, but the instrument with which it is to work is not working. It is like hardware and software. So, you have the hardware called the brain, and you have the software called the mind. So, the mind can be shifted from one hardware to another hardware, but the software is intact. As long as it is not corrupted, it is doing well. It is going to have its impact. First thing, as we said, is we should have the will to control the mind. Second, we should have understand the nature of mind. We will come to it a little more details a little later. And third thing, we should know techniques. And the most important technique or the part of practice of control of mind is that we must have a spirit of sportsmanship. It is not that we are going to become successful in controlling the mind in one sitting or in one attempt. It has to be done again and again. It is just like learning how to play something. Suppose you learn to play, let us say, football. So, there are times when you do not really hit the goal. Not only that, sometimes you do self goals also. So, likewise, when we are controlling the mind, we do make mistakes, we slip also, but we must have a sense of sportsmanship. So, people take lot of vows, and as all of you are students, most of you know how difficult it is to get up in the morning. Early rising, especially for young people, is like fighting a war. So, it is going to the battlefield and making an attempt to get up, and I am reminded of what Mark Twain said of smoking. It applies to this early rising also. Mark Twain said, "Oh, giving up smoking, it's very easy, I have done it several times." So, you have done that several times, trying to get up in the morning and making a resolution that I would get up tomorrow on time, but the same story repeats itself. So, we have to have certain sportsmanship. Let us not lose our courage, our conviction, our drive to control the mind. Control of mind again is the basis of all peace, all prosperity, all progress in life. If a person can learn how to control his mind or discipline his mind and have a say in what he is thinking and be able to implement whatever he is thinking, then peace, progress, prosperity do come to him. Now, coming to the nature of mind, I said Antakarana, or the internal instrument. You see, the mind has been studied by people in different parts of the world. We have the study of mind in the West, where it was taken more seriously around 100-150 years back. Before that, the mind was not given, the study of mind, or what we call as modern psychology, was not given as much importance as it is given to some extent now. So, the study has taken place there, and they have their own conclusions about it. But the study of mind was taken up in a very serious way in India at least 2000 years back. We say at least it is at least 2000 years back because we have a book, we all know this, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which is supposed to be the standard textbook for those who want to know yoga in detail. Now, whenever we use the word yoga, our mind gets very focused on what we call as doing some asanas. We have TV programs on asanas, we have pranayama. Well, that is one part of yoga. We call it the Hatha Yoga. It is a very important part because it deals with the study of body and the vital force and how you control your body functions. But then yoga has got deeper meaning and a larger meaning, and that is that it deals with the whole issue of control of mind. So we have this the most important book in that, the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, which is said to be at least 2000 years old. Now, what did Patanjali do? He did not say that I am writing this, he only said that I am compiling this. It means there were people who had done experiments with mind, who had known about mind, who had tried to study what is mind and its various aspects and functions, and they had arrived at some conclusions. He only consolidated them and he presented before us a full developed book called Patanjali Yoga Sutra. So it is at least 2000 years old. Why was it taken so seriously in India? There were times when in India people thought of the serious question of what is reality. What is real? We all know what is real. It is real. This is happening. What we are sitting here is happening. It is real. But then you have got that famous anecdote of a king who had some dream and he was very worried. In the morning he called his courtiers and he told them that I am very disturbed. The courtier asked him, why are you disturbed? He said, I had a dream that I have become a butterfly. The courtier said, that's nice that you became a butterfly. No, after becoming butterfly I was moving around, the king said, and I was hopping from one flower to another till I got struck near one flower. When I was trying to get up, there was a thorn in the branch and it tore one of my wings and I became injured. Only one wing remained, the other wing was torn. What is the problem with it? The courtier asked him. The king replied, well, the problem is not this. The problem is I am just thinking, you said it's only a dream, I should forget about it. But the problem is it the king who had the dream that it was a butterfly, or is it the butterfly which is having a dream that it is a king? So what is real? We all have this problem when we see dreams. Every day we see dreams. Of course, most of it we forget, fortunately, because if we remember all our dreams, we will not be able to attend our classes. Because all the things that come to us throughout the day and all that vast reservoir of memories which is there within us and desires and fears, they all assume different forms and come to us in the form of dreams. Sometimes they say there are dreams which deal with some things which are yet to happen, called prophetic dreams. But generally speaking, the dream state is one thing, when we are dreaming, is real to us. When a person is dreaming, to him he is not dreaming, it is real. It is only when he wakes up, then he starts thinking, what was it that frightened me? There is no tiger here. I was running away from the tiger. Where is the tiger now? So he starts thinking what is real. So a similar, some such thing had happened when people in India thousands of years back, I am just pointing out 2000, but the problem with the Indian history is that we do not have all the data. We get some data, again we go back and say, oh no, something more is there. So let's say that it happened 3000 or 5000 years back. There are people who wanted to study what is reality, and in their attempt to study reality, they found the importance of mind. Without mind being controlled, you cannot study the reality. So they took up the serious business of study of mind. And you know, there is one basic difference between what we today have as the Western approach to body, mind idea and the Indian approach. In the Western academic circles, you have got three different departments called philosophy, psychology and let us say religious studies. Whereas in India, the Indian tradition, we have all the three combined into one. They said we cannot really divide them. If a person is to control the mind, he must have the idea of reality, then only he will control the mind. What is reality? And if you want to study reality, you must have a proper study of the mind. And then when you have some idea of reality, you have some idea of control of mind and you want to practice it, that is called religion according to the Indian tradition. You put them into certain forms. So, in the yoga psychology, it is considered that mind is antakarana, which consists of several aspects. It has got, let us say, 4 functions. The first function, let us say, call it chitta. Chitta is which is a storehouse of all memories, all desires, all that we call it storage. We all know what is storage, computer being our, close to us, and we always have things put up in the chitta. And chitta is that which perceives things. It is actually the same mind. The first function, let us call it, it is the chitta. Let us say the chitta perceives a bird, and the next function of the mind is taken as what we call mind. It is called in Sanskrit as manas. So, chitta, manas. Manas shortlists. He says, oh, these are the things, let me take up. Maybe I am seeing as a crow. No, maybe I am seeing a bulbul, or maybe some warbler, or maybe some other option. And it takes these options and forwards it to the next function, which is called buddhi. Buddhi is that faculty of the antakarana which determines. It says, no, this is the crow, it is not something else. And that aspect of the mind which claims that perception is called ahankara. Yes, I am seeing that bird. So, you have got the 4 aspects, you have got chitta, you have got manas, you have got buddhi and you have got the ahankara. It is said all these 4 are the aspects of antakarana. In studying the nature of mind, we should also know that we believe that everything in the world is made up of 3 qualities called sattva, rajas and tamas. Any one of these qualities, when it becomes predominant, a person's control of mind is affected. Suppose the quality of sattva, which is the quality of peace and serenity, if it is predominant, then the the control of mind becomes much easier. Suppose rajas, the second quality, which is the quality of activity, of doing things, of restlessness, if this quality is very strong, mind becomes a little difficult to control. And if there is a mind predominantly influenced by tamas, the third quality, which is darkness, inertia, sense of indecision, mind is in a state of stupor. There is no change in that. So, these 3 qualities also we have to bear in mind when we are studying the nature of mind. There are also states of mind which have been discussed. It is all mentioned in the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. The states of mind, they say there are 5 states. For example, first is called the scattered state. The mind is so scattered. A part of the mind has gone to Singapore, a part of the mind has gone to a house which no longer exists, but I have lived there, but it has been demolished. Or part of the mind has gone to the Sensex, part to politics, part to something else. So, mind is very scattered, extremely scattered. Such as mind is in that position where it is very difficult to control it. Then they say there is another state of mind when the mind is in what we call as dark state. It is in a state of stupor. It is not decisive. When a person is in that state, you will find him very decisive. Should I get up or should I not get up? He may take half an hour up at 6 o'clock to decide. should I do this or should I not do it? There is a long discussion in his mind, but actually arriving at nothing. So, this is called a state of darkness. Then it is said there is another state which is called the gathering stage, where the mind has been slightly gathered, it has been brought nearer. And then it is said there is another state which is called the state of one pointedness, the fourth stage, finally leading to concentration, the fifth stage. Suppose a businessman was to have this state of one pointedness, he will be a better businessman. Suppose a fisherman has got this state of one pointedness, he will fish more number of fish. This kind of state of gathering or state of one pointedness is a one point for success in all that we do. So, we have this nature of mind. I have discussed the three aspects. The aspects called we have Antakarana, then we have three gunas, and these five states. Now, why this knowledge of why this discussion? See, in order to operate anything, you must have a proper understanding of that. Suppose you have to operate a newly purchased PC. Either you learn from the person who has come to install the PC, or you read the manual. Without the manual, without knowing which button is where and what is the place for booting it up and what are the functions of a PC, you will not be able to really operate it. Likewise, we must have a knowledge of the mind as to what is its nature, what are its influential factors, and what are the ways in which it has to be operated. Now, having said this, we come to the second half of our discussion, which is how do we control mind? This is mind, okay. This is what our scriptures say, this is what the Indian tradition says, but then how do we control the mind? In the beginning itself, we have referred to what is said that there is control which is possible through abhyasa and vairagya. This now let us further elaborate and try to understand. It is said there are certain preconditions for control of mind. In the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, it is said that there are first two steps are called, there are 8 steps, and first 2 steps are called yama and niyama. The word yama immediately brings into your mind the Yama Devata, that is the god of death. But the word yama actually means that which is very well controlled. So, it was believed that a man of very great self-control could become the god of death. The god of death was considered like a post. Anyone who has qualified for that can get it. Anyone who has qualified to become the prime minister can become prime minister. The prime minister is not the person, it is a post which keeps changing from person to person. Likewise, it is one stage. So, here the word yama means that it refers to control. Yamayati iti yama, that which controls. So, there are 5 aspects of yama, that is non-violence, chastity, non-possession, and speaking truth and things like that. Similarly, there are 5 niyamas which consist of self-study, satisfaction, certain amount of asceticism, and offering one's efforts to a higher power. The immediate meaning of these yama and niyamas is that we should have certain understanding of what is going to help us to control the mind. If a person has got very strong likes and dislikes, he will find it difficult to control the mind. We must have a certain accommodative attitude. We must understand things from a broader, more comprehensive perspective. More generous you should be, more detached in certain things. Similarly, if a person is given to some kind of an immoral lifestyle, whether it is physical or it is always being glued to the communication media which is making him think on those lines, he will find it difficult to control the mind. But then should we say that he can never control the mind? No, he has the hope. In fact, everyone has the hope, everyone has the possibility. But let us know this fact that living an immoral life is a great impediment for control of mind. If a person is given to intoxicants of any type, he will find it difficult to control the mind. Especially if his life is very chaotic, when he eats, when he sleeps, when he studies, what he eats, how and what he takes for his life, there is no structure to his life. Such a person will find it difficult to control the mind. Again, if a person has got a lot of guilt feeling, oh, I have done something wrong, and he is always dwelling on that past, he has got a constant nagging feeling, he will find it difficult to control the mind. Should we say that one should not have the guilt feeling? Of course, if you have done something wrong, it naturally comes to you. You get a feeling that I should not have done that. Why should I have been a party to such a bad thing? Well, we are not saying that you should not have that. In fact, if a person does not get any guilt, there is something wrong with him. But having said that he has got some guilt, he should not dwell upon it. Mistake happened. Now let's go forward. Why try to go on thinking of that mistake again? In fact, when you go on thinking of a mistake again and again, you are mentally doing it again and again. You are repeating that again and again. So we must let it go. It happened. There are many things that happened when I was a child. So I need not dwell upon that. Or sometimes, if somebody points out, well, this is what you did, then you might say, well, yes, that's how I saw the world that time. This is how I perceived things. That's why something wrong happened. Now let me go forward. So one must overcome a sense of guilt in order to control the mind. Nor should one indulge in too much of excessive self-mortification, troubling oneself in the name of controlling a mind. A person does not eat proper food, or he does not take care of his health under the excuse that no, if I somehow give punishment to my body, I will be able to control the mind. He is not right. One must have an approach which is balanced, where is certain amount of moderation. It is a approach where things are taken in the right spirit, in right quantity, at right time. So these are some obstacles which are there. Another thing which also is a great obstacle is that a person who engages himself in too much of controversies, unnecessary criticism of others, or finding fault with others all the time, he will find it difficult to control the mind. These are all obstacles, because he will be dwelling upon that, he will be dwelling upon others' mistakes. Should we say that we should not then judge or analyze or assess others? Well, Holy Mother said, Holy Mother means Sri Ramakrishna's consort, we call her as Holy Mother Sri Sharda Devi. She said that if you want peace of mind, don't find fault with anyone. This is a remarkable statement. How much time is spent in finding fault with others without having any capacity to change anybody? We find fault thinking that when I go on telling him his faults or go on discussing his faults to others, he will change. It doesn't. Change happens only when he thinks or he feels it's a fault. But to his eyes, it is quite all right. It's quite justifiable. So she said, if you want peace of mind, stop finding fault with others. Now, it's a very profound statement. There are certain aspects of control of mind. We must pay special attention to that. First thing is that we have to control our mind ourselves. Nobody can do it on our behalf. It's just like eating. You can't tell your friend, today you go to the mess and have my dinner. Well, you can tell that, but it doesn't make any sense. Like that, you cannot tell somebody, okay, you control my mind. On my behalf, you control my mind. If you say that if you really mean it a tough business, then he will control you in every aspect. You might have to become his slave. So let us understand one thing, that we have to control our mind by ourselves. Nobody else is going to be responsible for it. Maybe others can be of some help. Maybe this lecture can be of some help, or it may not be any help. But let us say that it is going to be a self-responsibility. Let us not immediately, if we ask people that you should control your mind, then people say, oh, my friend is not controlling. He is so restless. That's your friend's problem, not your problem. My friend is very bad. Fine. I accept your concern for him, but when it comes to control of mind, please see whether you are bad or not, whether you are taking care of yourself or not. So we have to accept this, that I have a responsibility towards myself, and that is that I must control, I must accept those means and methods which are necessary for controlling the mind. Purer the mind is, the easier it is to control. More impure the mind, more difficult to control. And by purity is meant, simple statement, overcoming our pleasure drive and too much of attachment. By purity of mind is meant that a person becomes more free and nearer to the self within. We just refer to the third thing, the divine within. It's called the self or Atman or Atma. There is that deeper reality within us. More the mind is nearer to it, the more purer it is. Or we might say, the more purer it becomes, it is nearer to the Atman. So purify the mind. In simple terms, it means take care of your senses. Take care of what you consume through your eyes, through your ears. These are the two most powerful senses which pollute us most, what we hear and what we see. You all know Gandhiji's three monkeys, that one of the monkeys had closed his eyes, another his ears, and the third one on his mouth. In fact, the whole of morality or good things are just summarized in few things. We can give long lecture on that, but we are only expanding it further. But the core thing is very, very small. One of our monks, he was the president of the Ramakrishna Order, Swami Vijnananandaji. He was asked one day, Swamiji, please give us some advice. Someone asked him. He said, well, what you learnt in your primary school, try to practice it. That solves it. We have learned in primary school, tell the truth, don't trouble anybody, don't steal, don't make excuses, don't tell lies. We know this. If you just follow it, that would solve most of our problem. So let us take care of what we see and what we hear, and this becomes very true today when we are so much bombarded by technology. When technology has come in a big way in our living style, we have at our palm top everything, good and bad. We must know how to use it. You cannot turn the clock back and say, I will not use technology, but you must know how to use technology and not get used by technology. So we must know how to say no to certain things. We must know that what is right and wrong, and I must take to that. So we have a famous prayer in one of the Upanishads which says that Bhadram karane bhishrunuyama devaha Bhadram pashyemakshabhirayajatraha Sthirairangai stuštuvagam sastanubihi Vyashema devhitam yadayuhu. May I hear that which is noble, auspicious by my ears. May I see that which is noble, auspicious through my eyes. May I have a strong limb, strong body, and may I live a long life, the life that has been bestowed on me by gods. Beautiful prayer, that we should try to hear that which is good and listen and see that which is good. Which means no good things are coming before us, let us know it for sure. What comes before us is a mixture of two. It's a mixture of good and bad, both before our eyes and ears. What comes before is a mixture. Sometimes the mixture is 50-50. This 50-50 is an interesting anecdote which is referred to one of the books. There was this man who was selling rabbit meat in one of the restaurants in America. So he had a customer who ordered for the rabbit meat, and when he started eating, he found that something is wrong with the meat. He said something is adulterated, and immediately he went to the court. As the custom is there, immediately he filed a case, and the owner was called and he was asked, is it so that you had adulterated the rabbit meat? He confessed, yes sir, yes your honor, I had, because that day we ran short of the rabbit meat, so I had to add some other meat He said, in what quantity? He said 50-50. And what does it mean? He says 1 horse, 1 rabbit. So we have sometimes this 50-50. You have the 50 of the bad and the 50 of the good in this sense. So we must take care of that. Important thing is that we must slowly learn to change the constitution of our mind. Make it more and more drawn towards the sattvic or sattva way of life. Now this requires that we have proper consumption of what we consume, not only through our mouth but also through our ears and through our eyes. In general, what we consume through our mind, because ultimately it is not the ears and eyes which consume, it is our mind that consumes. The images and sounds go to the mind. So the type of food that we decide to take, which is there is something very interesting, that we exercise our choice in many things in life. Now you have all chosen to be here in this evening. There is a choice. But very often we do not have this choice when things come to us through our senses. For example, somebody presents us something very unholy through our eyes or through our ears. Very often people don't make choice, and the result is they just let it in, and once it is let it in, it becomes the camel. You know, there was this camel who got put his nose through an Arab's tent, and the Arab protested and said, "Why are you putting your nose inside?" The camel said, "It is very hot outside, so I am just giving some rest to my nose." The Arab said, "All right, but don't disturb me too much." A little later he found that Arab went to sleep, and a little later he found that not only the nose, the whole mouth and the neck also has come in. And then he said, "What is it that you are getting in?" He said, "No sir, it is very hot outside, I am just putting my neck inside to get something. And don't disturb me further." The Arab went to sleep again, and after a while he found a very big stench inside the tent, and then he found the whole camel is sitting inside. And then he protested, "What is this that you have now entered?" Camel said, "Yes, this is what I have decided to be. If you want to be, you can be here or you can go out." So very often this is what happens with what we consume through our senses. It just enters and it becomes part of our thinking. So control of the mind requires that we take care of all these aspects. One very important aspect of control of mind is that we should have proper human relationships. It consumes a lot of our mental energy when we have had a bad relation with others. It's an art how we develop to have proper relationship with others. Most people think relationships are like a business. Once the work is over, you throw it away. But then real relationships require a lot of maturity. We require a lot of wisdom, lot of self-acceptance and acceptance of others as they are. If you just accept them as they are, you will find your relations very much smoothening. You don't go and protest to a thorny plant that why you have thorns. It is thorny. Likewise, there are people who are thorny, very difficult to work with. For such people, you know, Sri Ramakrishna gives a beautiful example. He says, you have God as per the Vedantic doctrine. God is in everybody. Now, if God is in everybody, should I go and hug the tiger? No, there is God in him, but he is only, you know, he calls Bhag Narayan ko namaste. Salutation to the tiger god. There are some people who are like tiger god. So for them we make namaste. Please keep a distance. You take care of them, you talk to them, there is God in them, don't hate them, but you know that he is a tiger god. Though there is God in him, but the outside face is that of a tiger. Similarly, we should have in the personal relationships, it is a very important aspect of our community life which needs a lot of training. In fact, one of the pillars which UNESCO has spoken of as the pillars of education, the 4 pillars it speaks of, one of the pillars is learning to live with others. You need intelligence for that also. So you need intelligence to solve, let's say, an algorithm or an algebra or let's say chemistry, some equation. or you need intelligence to understand what is history or management and things like that. Does not the human relationship also need intelligence? We need intelligence for that, and that intelligence is that provide place for everybody, don't hate anyone, and also carry on your relationships in such a way that even if there are differences, we must know how to resolve them meaningfully. Sometimes we can resolve them, sometimes we cannot resolve them. At that time we must accept this cannot be resolved. It's a thorny plant, I have nothing to do with it, but anyway this is what it is. So we must have a proper understanding of human relationships. One very important aid to human relationships is learning to see the divine principle that is present in all, irrespective of to which philosophy we might bear our allegiance to. By philosophy I mean that in our tradition, in the Indian tradition, we have various philosophies. One thing which all philosophies speak of is that there is divinity present in all. And Shri Krishna says in the Gita, Jivanam sarva bhuteshu, I am the life present in everyone. Isn't it everybody is having a life principle? So what is this life principle? If we dwell upon it a little further, we find this life principle is nothing but presence of God in all of us. So let us try to see, recognize that God in others. It may be that when we meet others, we see only a superficial side of the personality. We see his name, we see his perhaps the family he comes from, we see his intelligence by way of what certificates he has got, we see the color of his skin, we speak of his good or bad temperament. But behind all these things, there is something which is mysterious. And that mysterious something is that he is alive. He is present. You ask any doctor, he will tell you what a wonder it is that a man is alive. 100 years back, Alexis Carrel wrote a book and it won the prize at that time. It was called Man the Unknown. There is so much in us. See, all of us are healthy, sitting here. Isn't it a wonder that all of us are normally listening to something? Just I am uttering a few pieces of wind which is getting converted into ideas into your mind. We have this remarkable ear. Isn't it something mysterious, not to be taken in terms of something spooky, but something very divine present in all of us? So let us recognize that, then we will have a certain amount of respect for everyone, even for so-called low caste person or who is very low in his stature. We will have respect for him because there is divinity in him. Then our relationships will be much smoothened out. We will learn to not exploit them, but have proper understanding and proper interaction with them. Before I conclude, one very important thing to remember is that we should have certain emergency methods or techniques for control of mind and certain regular things to control the mind. They are both necessary. When we say that we are having things which are regular, one thing which comes to mind which is very important is the practice of meditation. Make it a part of your daily life to sit quietly maybe for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but don't make it half an hour to begin with, because if you make it for half an hour, next day you would not like to sit. You will say, oh, it has too much, I have a lot of homework, a lot of things to attend to, than to meditate for half an hour or 1 hour. That's all right for Swamis. As far as I am concerned, 10 minutes is sufficient. It's true that you begin with 10 minutes, and in that 10 minutes try to meditate. Now the word meditation simply means that you try to focus the mind within. Swami Vivekananda calls meditation as a process by which you throw mind back to its source. Throwing the mind back to its source means from where all the thoughts are coming, go to that point. Now meditation, we all know, has originated, the practice of meditation has originated in India. It has been now well accepted fact that even in Harappa civilization we find certain coins, certain artifacts where somebody is meditating. That's a few thousand years back, that somebody is closed his eyes and trying to control his thoughts. So we must learn to meditate. Now, when we say that we learn to meditate, you mean to say, are you going to conduct a lecture on that? No. I will just give you 1 or 2 points on that and proceed further. As an addition to control of mind through meditation, you can also take up the idea of repeating some divine name to whichever religious tradition we might belong to. Or even if you do not belong to any particular religious tradition, if suppose you say, I just believe in Om. I remember one of the scientists who went to the West, and he was an Indian, and it was asked of him, you are from India, please tell us about meditation. They presumed every Indian knew about meditation. So he said, I did not know what to say, but the question had been posed to me. So I just remember that my mother, she used to sit before her small shrine in the house and repeat something. But what is that she used to repeat? He said, I do not remember, I do not know rather. So all that I thought was, why not let us repeat the simple alphabets A, B, C, D, or let us say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He said, let me begin with that. And he found by just repeating 50 or 100 times this simple counting, you will find a certain amount of peace coming to the mind. And in meditation, what we try to do is, we try to focus the mind, let us say, in some part of the body, and ideally it is said it is in the center of the chest. Think of the divine present there. Think of your own divine nature and try to focus the mind there. We must make proper and good use of imagination. Imagination is playing a lot of role in our day-to-day life. One of our Swamijis used to say, look, in geography you have got lot of lines which are drawn around the earth. That divides the whole earth or planet into several zones. But has somebody taken a giant pencil and drawn line there? There is no such line there. But we know it is a line of which divides the globe into two. It is very hot. So it is an imagination, but it is a very productive and useful imagination. Likewise, here also we have certain imaginations. We try to think that the divine is present in us and we try to make use of it. So meditation is one thing which, if you make a part of your life, morning and evening, at least once a day, you will find that control of mind becomes much easier. And as it comes to what we call as emergency breaks or emergency means, one thing which very much the Patanjali Yoga Sutra speaks of, he calls is redirecting the thoughts. Suppose some thought is troubling you very much. At that time, try to have an opposite thought. Suppose a thought of hatred is there. You are hating somebody and it has caught your mind so much, it will make the mind restless. That is the very nature of such thoughts. At that time, do not focus on even the very thought that I want to get rid of hatred. Rather, think of some opposite thought. An opposite thought to hatred is love. Think of a love between mother and the child, between brothers, any pure love that you see. Unselfish love. There is unselfish love in this world. Sometimes we know in our various experiences in life we become very pessimistic and say, oh, there is no unselfishness is there, but there is unselfishness. Though it is not visible, we all know from our personal experiences, unless there is some certain amount of unselfishness, no family can go on. There has to be certain amount of sacrifice, then only the family goes on. If the family has broken, it is because somewhere the monster of selfishness has entered and eaten up everything. So let us think of that pure love. In fact, it is much easier for a believer in God to control the mind, though it is open to all. Those who do not believe also, there is a possibility, enough possibility, but it is much easier. Suppose a person believes in God, he loves God, it concentrates the mind. Love concentrates the mind. Love has got that power. And if a person thinks of a divine form, the mind is much easily and much quickly concentrated. And another thing about control of mind, sometimes you just simply go to some place which inspires you. Now, if I was in Chennai, I would tell our friends there, if your mind is very restless, please go to the beach. Now, here it's there's no beach here, so you have got beautiful campus here, you have a lot of greenery here. You get up early in the morning and try to see the sunrise. I don't know how many people see sunrise, that's also a question. So, if you see the sunrise consciously, people go to see Kanyakumari to see the sunrise. You can see right here because the sun will rise everywhere. Whether it is Kanyakumari or whether it is Kanpur, it will rise everywhere. So, let us see the natural phenomena. The natural phenomena, sometimes the sun set also, it calms the mind. Sometimes as an emergency measure, if nothing is working, simply go to some friend with whom you can sit quietly, or go to a place of worship, maybe a temple, maybe a church, or maybe Gurudwara, anywhere which you find some holy vibrations are there, go and sit there. That will also have its impact. In fact, in Swamiji's Raja Yoga, he mentions that these holy places were originally made with the idea of providing such places where holy vibrations exist. Because there are people who have lived holy lives there, they have sung holy songs there or thought of holy thoughts there, and that pervades that place. So, when you go there, it influences you also. That is the original idea, Swamiji mentions that. Whichever way, we have to have the idea that control of mind is the key to knowledge, key to peace, key to progress and prosperity. We must learn to have certain basic ideas and try to put it in our daily life. In fact, the very subject of today's talk, mind and its control, has been widely discussed, and we have a small book also on the same subject. You might get it in from our mutt. Please try to read more and try to dwell upon these ideas. I am very happy that I could spend some time talking to you about various aspects of mind control. Thank you very much. Do we have question and answer? Yes. This is there. This need to be taken.
Minutes for question answer session from the audience.
We're in a split state of mind and we're not able to decide like we should do this or do that. What's the measure I can take at that point of time in order to come out of the dilemma?
Right. This is one thing which comes to anyone who wants to take a decision, that he has two options. So what he does generally, so it is that he will weigh pros and cons, and after making pros and cons and weighing them, is it very sure that he has taken the right decision? Not very sure. So there is a certain amount of risk that a person has to take. When you make a decision, there is a certain amount of risk. In fact, it was asked of a famous general, army general who led several armies, said, how do you decide when you decide to, let's say, attack some place or invade? Do you know all the implications of what you're going to do? He would say, I know only 10%, 90% is a gamble. I just jump into it. I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm not saying that you should not make proper understanding of pros and cons. Traditionally, it was said that before you even make a proper understanding of pros and cons, try to calm the mind. Maybe try to meditate. It will aid you. Meditation is not going to solve it, but it's going to aid you to attain a proper state of mind, which will help you to take proper decisions. In fact, you find in Swamiji's life, Swami Vivekananda's life, there are many times when he goes to meditate. For example, he traveled all over India for 7 years. He was a remarkable traveler. If somebody could write a book on how much travels he has done, that itself would be a very engaging study. And he reached Kanyakumari. He had seen India as a traveler on walking on the foot, and finally when he reached Kanyakumari, he was very pained by seeing what he had seen in India. He had seen a very ancient culture, a very remarkable heritage, but so much of poverty, squalor, and the type of situation, economic situation that existed. It is said when he went to Kanyakumari, he went to the temple of Mother Kanyakumari, which is right on the seashore. It's a very ancient temple. And then he spotted a big rock in the ocean, and he swam across, which is half a kilometer, into the ocean, and it is shark infested. Even today, if you go, you will find the water is so turbulent. And Swamiji went there, and it said for 3 days he was meditating. He had no food. It is said one fisherman used to bring some food and leave it many times, he won't eat. So 3 days and 3 nights he had remarkable power of concentration, extraordinary power, and he meditated. That meditation gave solution to what he was looking for. He said, I will go to the West and I will carry the message of India to the West, and he was the first monk from India to have gone to the West. So that decision came through meditation. So meditation, when it calms down, it helps to, it brings us a proper state. In the traditional tribal societies, even today in Africa, in many parts of India also, it is said that when a young boy or a girl was given some task, they would simply go to jungle and come back after 3-4 days, thinking over the issue. Now, here we live in city, we don't have jungle to go to, but we have our rooms, we have certain space. Let us think over it. The split often comes from because we want to do 2 things. So let us decide. So let me decide this is what I am going to have, and keep the principle of pleasant and beneficial in mind. Let us try to take always decisions in terms of that which is beneficial. It may not be pleasant, but it is beneficial, shreyas, then it is going to be of great help later.
Any more?
What is an operator?
Kindly say it again.
What is an operator?
Operator. You mean the English word operator? It simply means that which operates. Yes.
So in this sense, that mind, this operator is operating mind, and mind is sitting in the brain. So what is this operator? What is we?
Oh yes, if you have referred to the deepest question of what is we, you will have to have another lecture for that. But in brief, I would say that this question is very profound. That what are we? Who are we? Now, the moment I say we, I'll ask you this. I employ this method often. Suppose I ask somebody, who are you? The first thing that he will do is tell his name. I say, I don't ask your name, I want to know who are you. Suppose he says, I'm a student. Well, I'm not asking what you're doing. Suppose he says, well, I am son of so and so. Then I would say, I'm not asking what is your relationship. Suppose he says, no, I am an Indian. Then I would say, I'm not asking what's your nationality. Then suppose he says, oh, I am a human being. Well, I would say, I'm not asking what is your species. And you get flabbergasted. All possible answers I have given. And then you say, who am I? So this question was asked in our country. And they found the answer. And you know, there's a beautiful verse in the Upanishad, it's called Shvetashvatar Upanishad. There he says that I know that I am divine. He says we are all children of immortality. Shunvantu vishve amritasya putraha aye dhamani vishwani tastuhu vedahametam purusham mahantam. I am that divine being. Now it looks blasphemous to say that I am God. That's not the meaning here. The meaning is the same divinity which is present in every one of us. First of all, is it present in every one of us? Is a question again. Yes, this is what the scriptures say. We are all searching for eternal life. Anybody who says that I won't like to have eternal life? No, we all want to live long. We want to live long. Then we say we would like to have a lot of happiness. We would like to have consciousness. This desire to live, to exist, even if a person says that I am not interested in living, he still says that he is, then only he can say that he doesn't want to live. So there is existence, the point of existence very much present in him. That idea of existence, desire for happiness, say for happiness, for example, you don't say, okay, happy, I am now fine, but I don't like to be happy next week. Or I don't like to be happy next year. No, I want to be happy all through my life. So this desire to exist and this desire to be happy always, this desire to not only be happy and exist, also I should be something alive, not dead matter. This was called in our scriptures as Sat Chit Ananda. Satchidananda. We all want that Satchidananda because that is our real nature. Sometimes we get fed up with the situations in life and we say, oh, this life is sufficient. I would not like to have a long life. But if you analyze them more carefully and meticulously, what they are saying is, I am not happy with these situations. I want different set of circumstances. I want different set of maybe body, faculties. I want a different family. I want a different country. Maybe a different political structure. I want something different. So this is not sufficient. So, well, we know what it happens. So what we really want at the end of it is that we want Satchidananda. We want eternal life. Nobody wants to become non-existent because it's not possible for us. And we always want to be happy and full of joy. That is what is given in our scripture as the one thing which we are all seeking in life in different ways. But then we have to pass through various experiences, we have to come of a little maturity, then we understand this is what we are seeking in life. Yes, one more question.
So, I mean, part of that has already been answered by this one. So, you were talking about the conscious. The conscious even exists when the body or the faculty is not there. So, the question is really on the answer of what happens when one dies and carries over. So, how does this really happen?
Okay, this mystery of what happens after death.
Yeah. What happens to the consciousness?
Consciousness. Now, we use two words. We use the word Atman and we use the word Jivatman. The word Atman refers to the pure consciousness without any conditioning, without any set of restriction or limitations or whatever. But when it has limitations, it has conditions, it is called Jivatman. Though it has the original divinity is very much present there, but it has something along with it. That something along with it is called Jivatman. Now what is that something? It is said in our scriptures there are 17 elements of that. There are 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of movement, then there are 5 pranas, that is the ways in which our vital energy works. Then there is the mind, and also it is taken ahankara or sense of I. These 17 are together taken as to mean the jivatva. When a person is born, he is a jiva who has assumed this body and is born in certain conditions based on his previous actions. And when he leaves this body, which means the death has come, it's the body that dies. The Jivatman carries forward the result of this life to the next life, which means there is a certain amount of storage of these experiences. It does not die. The Jivatman does not die. So then what's the point of Mukti? Mukti is when the Jivatman has understood it does not need anything to make it happy. It is always happy. We need so many things to make ourselves happy. We have reasons for that. We need a cell phone. We need an iPod. We need many advanced apps. We need many things to make ourselves happy. Because we have assumed this body, so we need for practical purposes, we need many things. But the time comes when we are dropping this body off. At that time we have so many desires. Right now we have many desires. So there was a joke of a person, it came in Reader's Digest, that a person was very much thinking that after a month, suppose I die. Now what are the things I should have in mind before I die? So he made a list. He wanted to learn guitar. He wanted to visit his friend. And he wanted to see a movie. He wanted to eat some particular item. So for a month he had a list of some 20 things. And he started fulfilling them one by one. After a month or at the end of that month, he had another set of list ready.
He didn't die. So this is what happens. We keep generating new desires. So should we give up all desires? Well, it looks very nice that I should give up all desires. The desires don't give it up. They hold on to us. So we have to, more than eradication, we have to do education of our desires. If we educate ourselves, education not in terms of formal education, but in terms of giving a higher turn to our desires. Say, I want to help somebody, that's also a desire. I want to read Swami Vivekananda's complete work, that's also a desire. But that desire will slowly lead me to something higher. So a time comes when the Jivatman has become free from all desires. It has understood what I said at the beginning, like that king. The king was actually a person of great self-knowledge, who said that after all this world is a dream. Now what happens to a man's state when he says this world is a dream? It's very difficult to say, but one thing is very clear, he's very detached. But remember, he's also king. But he's very detached. He's not affected. So does he become like a stone? Nothing is affected him. So we find some people are very stony in there, they don't feel for others. So does it become like that? It is said that a man who achieves that state of mind, he is a man of tremendous compassion. Instead of saying that he does not care for others, he is a man of great unselfishness. And Swami Vivekananda says the test of a person being spiritual or religious is whether he is unselfish. Unselfishness is God. Unselfishness is true spirituality. When the Jivatman goes from after death, it takes a new body based on the samskaras, based on the karmas. It assumes a new body, but it takes the previous samskaras also along with it. Then how long it will assume in that body? It is said it's based on the karmas. In the Yoga Sutra, we have a verse, a sutra to that the type of health you get, the type of family you are born in, all things is determined by that. Then how long will he live? As long as it is permitted. Then next, he'll go to the next body, the next body. It goes on like an eternal cycle. Till a time comes by, let's say, some divine will or by his own pure samskaras, when he starts taking an upward journey. He says, well, it's fine that I should experience these things, but these experiences do not give me the ultimate happiness. They give me happiness, but they don't give me ultimate happiness. Then he starts searching within. And when he makes an inside search, that's what really the meditation really finally leads to. He discovers his divine core, which was ever fulfilled. These are the words used in the Sanskrit language. Ever fulfilled. And he is full of joy, happiness. We are thinking always happiness in terms of possession, always in terms of achievements. There is one type of happiness. So once a person discovers that inner happiness, he has reached the highest goal, and then he need not be born again. Mukti does not mean always death. Mukti can be attained right here when we are having this body, and such people are called Jivan Muktas. People who have become freed even while they have this body. Later, when the body has lived and it has reached what we call its expiry date, he just drops it off, and maybe he goes off into his eternal nature, or maybe he decides to come back. He decides to come back and do some good to others, or maybe he goes away. Sri Ramakrishna gives the example of a person, a group of 2 or 3 people who are going, and there was a enclosure. A lot of sound could be heard, some big thing and nice aroma was coming. So they got one ladder and climbed up. The first one saw, and he just opened his eyes and said, oh, and fell into it. Never came back. So also the second person. The third person went and saw. He was so happy to see that. But in thought, the fourth and fifth persons, they should also know what's there inside. So he came back and told this to the other people, said there is a way to go up also. Such a person is called a great avatara or a great sage who wants to do good to others, who comes back, he says, yes, I will let them know what is there on the other side.
So is there more than one Jivatman?
It is said that as far as Jivatman is concerned, there are many, but the essential divinity is same. essential divinity present in all of us is same. It's like this. There is one sun and there are a number of pots, and each one of the pots has got water. Now how many suns are there? There's only one sun. But then there are so many reflections. So each one of us is a reflection, and we feel one with that water and one with that pot called the body and mind. Once you break that, once you break all the pots, what remains is only one sun, which always was. So there is multiplicity, at the same time there is only oneness. Yes.
Okay friends, before we conclude today's evening, so I have few announcements to make. Firstly, tomorrow, as you are all aware, that we have this workshop on entrepreneurship and social responsibility at the same venue. Maybe the venue will get changed to L16. If that gets changed, we'll put up a slip outside, where again Swami Atma Shraddhananda Ji will give us an insight into what Swami Vivekananda's idea of entrepreneurship was, and how some of us, our student community, or each one of us can take up some of those ideas and go to higher aspects of fulfillment of life. Apart from that, we have also scheduled an informal interaction with Swamiji. If you have more questions and to ask, we had mentioned the timing as 11 a.m. and the venue is this venue itself tomorrow. So currently it stays the same if everyone agrees to this, and if not, we'll have the informal interaction in the visitors hostel where Swamiji will be staying tonight. Besides that, the Professor Joshi had given us this book which talks about various inspiring incidents in Sri Ramakrishna's, Holy Brothers and Swami Vivekananda's life. This book is written by Swami Tathagatananda Ji, of the head of the New York Center. This book is available free of charge. The only point that Professor Joshi wanted to make is that a person who takes this should ensure that he reads it. That is the only condition. If you are interested to take a look at the book or take a copy of it, you are more than welcome. Apart from this, as you all are aware that Swamiji's 150th birth anniversary celebrations are going on, and this 2013 January we had a grand celebration, and on the similar lines we are planning to have another grand celebration in 2014 January, the tentative dates being 10th to 13th of January. If I think in the attendance sheet also we have asked your preference whether you want to participate in the organizing team. If yes, then please just come forward. We very soon will call a meeting. Come up with your ideas and suggestions on how to make this convention a bigger and more activities. So I thank Swamiji for coming down to Kanpur from Chennai. This was the second time we were requesting him, and it was a really wonderful talk given by him. And tomorrow again, of course, he'll be talking. I thank Swamiji once again. I hand over to Paul to make the final conclusion.
Timing of tomorrow?
Timing for the workshop will be 4 a.m. 4 p.m. And
How
for
many
the
days it will
informal
be?
interaction, it's 11 a.m. in the morning.
How many days it will be? The
Just
duration
tomorrow.
the same?
Tomorrow itself.
Tomorrow, that is the domain.
Thank you everyone. It was wonderful to hear so